team are on the post-legislative tour, but please ask them. And just know that we are still trying to work our way through some of the language in the bills, and we'll let you know which which pieces of language are a little bit challenging to us. So today we're going to be looking at excerpts from the public school appropriation bills, as well as a few other bills related to public school finance. And as we go through this presentation, please type any questions that you might have into the chat box, and we'll review those periodically. So I've already mentioned that a copy of this presentation will be posted to the school finance website. The bills that we'll be talking about, for the most part, are going to determine the funding that we'll be sending to you in the next school year. The second part of my presentation will give you budget guidance for the $202.4 million in special distributions that will be sent to schools throughout next school year. So a summary of the 2026-2027 public school appropriation will also be posted with the budget forms. We're just waiting for the webmaster to get them posted. But what you'll see when you look at that on the website, or if you're just looking at the screen, is that first column in yellow shows the original fiscal year 2026 appropriation. In column 2, it shows the revised fiscal year 2026 appropriation. You know, Gideon mentioned that we do have a lot to be grateful for, and sometimes that's a struggle for me, but I will recognize that a lot of state agencies had to experience holdbacks this school year that carried forward into next school year. And this adjustment for public schools between the original and the revised appropriation was something that we were asked to do in December. And what it did was we took your actual support units for this current school year, and those based on your November, December IC uploads, and that totaled 15,722 support units. Well, the fiscal year 2026 budget was based on an estimated 15,954 support units. And so what we did was we reran fiscal year 26 numbers using the current year actual information that we had at that time, the 15,722 support units. And then we adjusted down the salary and benefit apportionments and the discretionary funds. And that's how we had that $22.4 million reduction. It in no way will impact the funds that we distribute to you for this school year. Let's say we end up with 15,800 support units. Any additional funds that are required to be sent to you will be pulled from the Public Education Stabilization Fund, or PSIF. We still have a healthy balance in that fund. So please rest assured that fiscal year 2026 is going to be fully funded. And then some good news also that we had in fiscal year 2026 was an additional federal spending authority of $7.8 million. And you'll see that on line 1F. Well, you submit your federal funding reimbursement requests to us, and then to the other side of the building. School finance does not work with federal funds, for the record. But then they pull down that money, but we are limited by the amount of the spending authority in the appropriation bill. So we were really grateful for that $7.8 million increase for this year, and that increase carried forward into fiscal year 2027. So overall, when you look at the green column, which is the 2027 appropriation, you're seeing a little bit of an increase in general funds, and you're seeing an overall amount of $3.1 billion in total revenues being appropriated for next school year. In section 2, we have the statutory expenditures for fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027. And you're going to see a lot of these amounts are flat or have a small decrease. A lot of these dollars, especially lines 2A through line 2G, will come to you as part of the foundation payments. I think most of the rest are special distributions or payments directly to the Idaho Digital Learning Academy. But the small decreases for exceptional contracts and for border contracts, and even for salary-based apportionment for administrators, was to align the dollars requested for fiscal year 2027 with what we have been distributing to schools. Meaning we've been maybe a bit over appropriated for border contracts and exceptional child contracts. And then the change for salary-based apportionment was adjusting the administrative index to more closely reflect what we've been seeing for the last couple of years. Of course, the one big decrease that we had on line 2K was for the Idaho Digital Learning Academy, and we have several slides to talk about that as well. So altogether, the total statutory distributions for next year is about just over $2 billion, which is about a $16 million decrease from the 26 appropriation. And then in sections 3, 4, and 5, we have our non-statutory expenditures, our federal expenditures, and then our payments to the state school for the deaf and blind in Gooding. The non-statutory expenditures are the ones that dollars that we send to you that are based on intent language in the appropriation bill. So technology, student achievement, remediation dollars, professional development dollars. Those dollars go to you because the appropriation intent language allows us to send those. What you'll see in this section is that there was a transfer out of the Division of Central Services of $2.25 million, and that was redirected by the legislature, and we'll talk about this more later too, to be distributed as English language learner dollars in that special distribution. And so that's great. But the big news, I think, for the department is that it's a small amount, but it's a start, and that $5 million was appropriated for the Idaho High Needs Student Fund. The superintendent and others at the department have been working really hard to get this kind of a language created in Idaho code. And so I'm really excited about this new distribution. And then when you look at total revenues for fiscal year 2027 of about $3.1 billion, and total expenditures of just under $2.4 billion, that leaves $751 million to be distributed as discretionary funds. We've had some big changes in how those discretionary funds are going to be distributed for fiscal year 2027. We have lots of slides on that as well, but you'll see that we have 2 amounts for general discretionary, and we have 2 different amounts for health insurance discretionary. So moving on, the appropriation bills in most cases identify the amounts from various state sources that will be distributed or expended for the period July 1, 2026 through June 30, 2027. You'll also hear me call that fiscal year 2027. The bills also appropriate funds to the divisions of student support, teachers, facilities, central services, Idaho Educational Services for the Deaf and the Blind, and the Idaho Digital Learning Academy. The bills also define certain terms, including distributed, to mean monies that are paid to schools and the Idaho Digital Learning Academy with no funds held for any other contract or administrative costs. When we see the term expended, we know that that means that those dollars are going to be spent on your behalf. And they're typically they are always in the Division of Central Services. Altogether, the Division of Central Services has about $17 million appropriated, which is about 0.72%, less than 1% of the $3.1 billion appropriated. So what the legislature started doing a couple of years ago is, instead of having like one big public school appropriation bill and then maybe a few trailer bills for Idaho code that was maybe amended or created later in the session, what they're doing now is they are setting a maintenance bill, which pretty much just carries forward the dollars that were appropriated in the prior year with adjustments for maybe one-time dollars that were included and adjustments for the health insurance cost. And maybe if there was a CEC, change in employee compensation, that would have been included as well. And then that's what they're doing now is a maintenance bill. That's Senate Bill 1362. And then later in the session, they're looking at what I think is called population forecast. So if we're expecting increased support units, or maybe we need more money for the career ladder because we're expecting more experienced teachers or more highly placed instructional staff to be on the career ladder than newer, that's when they would appropriate those dollars. And so we have two very distinct bills. We have Senate Bill 1362, the maintenance, and then we have Senate Bill, I think it's 1444. We'll cover that one as well. That pretty much drive the dollars that are going to be spent or distributed to schools next year. So 1362 was set in February, and it was signed into law by the governor in maybe late March or early April. As I mentioned, there is no CEC, change in employee compensations for schools, for state employees this for fiscal year 2027. The general discretionary per best 28-week support unit remains in this bill at $23,472. And this is why I gave you the history on, we have two very separate bills for public schools, because if you don't go and read Senate Bill 1444, you don't know that that amount was reduced to $19,723 for virtual school buildings and for their support units. And so again, we'll cover this more. Senate Bill 1362 divided discretionary funds for health insurance into two categories, an amount for schools on the state health plan and an amount for schools not on the state health plan. And so those are just some of the biggest highlights, I thought. And of course, the $5 million for the Idaho High Needs Fund is in a separate bill. So starting our review of Senate Bill 1362 and the different sections included, Section 8 continues to provide $13,750,000 for professional development for teachers, with $10,850,000 for general professional development, $2.9 million for professional and $2.9 million for professional development for dyslexia. The language is still there that requires the superintendent to track the usage and effectiveness of professional development efforts at the state and local levels. Section 9 continues the language allowing the $6,359 to remain in each cell of the career ladder. While we have requested this language be codified and that schools no longer have to do an annual report, that didn't happen this legislative session. I will be making a recommendation to the executive team that we try again for next year, because we know these dollars are built into your salary schedules. And the uses of these funds that you're reporting to us isn't changing because they're built into your career ladders, your salary schedules. So Alexandra McCann in Public School Finance, who is our staffing expert, is currently updating the fiscal year 2027 Career Ladder Guidance Manual. And this is a picture from that manual showing the career ladder allocation table that shows the amounts by cell. While the fiscal year 2027 cell amounts remain the same as the cell amounts from fiscal year 2026, and remember the $6,359 additional compensation is already reflected in these amounts, eligible movement will still be happening for fiscal year 2027. That's really important. There was no freezing of the career ladder. Instead, the dollar amounts just remain the same. And I want to remind everybody that Idaho Code 331004E requires that no full-time instructional or pupil service staff on this rung shall be paid less than the Cell 1 amount. That means any full-time staff On the residency rung needs to be paid the $50,252. Anyone on the professional rung needs to be paid at least full-time, $53,402. And anyone on the advanced professional rung, the minimum is $64,427. While Section 10 states the general discretionary distribution factor will again be $23,472 for fiscal year 2027. This language was amended by Section 6 of Senate Bill 1444, changing discretionary funds to $19,723 per support unit for virtual schools in our school districts and in our charter schools. That language is on the screen before you. It's new language, and it reduces that amount to $19,723. And we'll see some more language in a few minutes, which is why Dean is here today, on the reporting of your virtual students. Section 11 increases the distribution factor for health insurance per best 28-week support unit to $25,063.50 per support unit for schools that are on the state health insurance plan, and $24,273.43 per support unit for schools that are not on the state's health insurance plan. So what does it mean to be on the state insurance plan? It means your insurance is the same as that for state employees, and that you work with the Office of Group Insurance at the Department of Administration. Those schools that are purchasing insurance through the Idaho School Benefit Trust, ISBT, are not considered to be on the state's health insurance plan. We have maybe 40 or so school districts and charter schools that are on the state health insurance plan. And I think I'll ask our budget team when they are reviewing the budgets and looking at your estimating state M&O sheet to make sure that you are using the correct amount. And so I have a list of the schools that are participating through the state insurance plan. So we'll make an effort to catch anything, but you may not submit your budget till July. So please just be careful about that. Section 11 goes on to say that the department will again collect insurance information from each school district and charter school, and that legislative services and Division of Financial Management staff will help us determine the format of that report. Section 12 again provides $36.5 million for technology in fiscal year 2027. Please remember that the money so distributed shall be used to implement and operate a learning management system of each school district or public charter school's choice, and that the department shall verify that school districts and charter schools are using funds to purchase a learning management system that is compliant with these standards. And as I talk about technology, you're probably thinking, oh, I don't think we've gotten our money yet for fiscal year 2026, and you are correct. We did collect the information in August or September through an instructional survey. We had maybe 4 or 5 or 6 school districts and charter schools indicate that they did not have a learning management system. So we've reached out to them, and then we've gotten responses from a few of them, and we'll be doing an 80% distribution. I'm hopeful maybe in the next week or two. Section 13 is standard language used by Carrie Ernst, our chief accountant, and does not impact schools. And Section 14 appropriates $4,324,900 from the cigarette, tobacco, and lottery income tax revenue that comes to the department monthly. These dollars are distributed initially in maybe February, as they become available. And so it's typically a smaller initial distribution. We try to do 80% initially, 20%. This one's typically smaller because we're still waiting for the dollars to come in. So it goes on to say that the money shall be distributed to schools through a combination of a base amount of $2,000 plus a prorated amount based on the prior year's average daily attendance, meaning your attendance from this year. Such funds shall be used to develop and implement school safety improvements and/or to facilitate and provide substance abuse prevention programs in the public school system. If you are one of the 7 new charter schools that's opening on July 1st, you should only be budgeting a base amount of $2,000 for this distribution. All right, and I was just shown that there are quite a few questions coming up. The first question, I'm sorry.
It's not a question.
Okay. Okay, we are chatting about the discrepancy in the amounts for health insurance depending on whether a school district is on the state plan. Is there any pushback at the state level about this discrepancy? Well, that sounds like an executive team question, but I want to give you a little bit of background on that. So every year we have to do a health insurance survey, and in that survey we ask, did your premiums go up or down? What we're not asking, and maybe we should be, is did the quality of your plan also go up or down? Because we know that to keep costs lower, that some of you have maybe raised your deductible, increased your co-pays. But using that information that was submitted by schools, it showed a statewide average increase of just about 10 point something %. And that was used then to determine the discretionary amount for schools not on the state plan. For schools on the state plan, there is a state amount that is used for state agencies and now for the schools on the state plan, and that determined the distribution amount for those schools. We did, as far as pushback, I mean, I think I can easily say I gently reminded the legislative staff and DFM staff, Division of Financial Management staff, that just what I mentioned earlier, that schools may have only had a 10% average increase because they were reducing their plan benefits. And I think they understood that. I also think that I maybe should stop, but all right, I'll finish. They were pretty determined to make cuts, and that was one that they were able to do. Gideon, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think we'll probably need to get some more information from the governor's office on the rationale behind that, but that was a recommendation from the governor. And yeah, I think, like Julie said, at least part of the thinking was for those on the state plan, that increases or decreases should mirror the state plan. And we know that not all districts and charters, that those not on the state plan have a lot of different plans. And so the information we have is the information you all submit in the annual survey. And so that's how that amount was determined. But I would imagine that will be the case moving forward, that we'll continue to have the 2 separate health insurance discretionary funding amounts.
Right. We have another health insurance related question, and it's great. I should have highlighted this, so thank you for pointing it out. The question is, did the health insurance appropriation language still allow for the utilization of monies as discretionary after health insurance expense has been met? And yes, it's on the screen before you. It is page 2 of section 11 on slide 17. And it says, if the distribution provided for health, vision, and dental benefits or insurance is in excess of the individual school districts or charter schools' actual costs, the excess funds may then be used at the school's discretion. And so a few years ago, they initially, I believe, were proposing to take this language out. So it's good that it's still in there. All right, so we'll go back to section 15. I don't see any other questions, Ashley. Okay, so section 15 addresses remedial coursework. The distribution stays at $4,715,000 and shall be distributed for coursework for students failing to achieve proficiency on Idaho standards-based achievement tests for English language arts, math, and science in dollar amounts determined by the superintendent. The superintendent shall report to the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, JFAC, the Senate Education Committee, and the House Education Committee by no later than January 5th, 2027 on the uses of funds and the effectiveness of the coursework and efforts. And Scott Unstrom, our Director of Content and Curriculum, will reach out to you for that information. Section 16 again requires the department to verify that school districts, not charter schools, school districts have posted their open enrollment information prior to distributing the November 15th foundation payment. This is something that a survey that we will send to you probably late October, again this fall. And we just really want to thank you for all the timely responses we've gotten the last 2 years that we've had to do this verification. We've not had to hold the November 15th payment for anybody. All 115 school districts have been in compliance both years, and I'm just sure that's going to happen again for fiscal year 2027. The language below is in section 17. And again appropriates $4,820,000 for English proficiency. And this is another section that was later amended. So just treat that $4,370,000 number lightly. It says this amount will be distributed to schools on a pro rata basis using the population of English language learners under criteria established by the department, and that the remaining $450,000 will be distributed as part of a competitive grant program overseen by Maria Puga, our Director of Federal Programs, and her team. The 12 schools that received grants this year were in the final year of the 3-year grant cycle. The department is currently reviewing the applications for the 2026-2027 school year. And I think that the successful applicants should hear in the next month or two if they were successful. The language goes on to say that the superintendent shall develop the program elements and objectives governing the use of these funds and include a program evaluation component, and that she will report this information to the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, the Senate and House Education Committees by no later than January 5th, 2027, including information on the program design, use of funds, and program effectiveness. And Maria Puga and her team will contact you for the information needed. And then here's a note that Section 9 of Senate Bill 1444 provided a one-time transfer of $2,250,000 from the Division of Central Services, increasing that $4,370,000 distribution to $6,620,000 for fiscal year 2020 only. And so here's the language for that, that transfer, that one-time transfer. And so when we go over our special distributions, you'll see a pretty significant increase in what we're telling you to budget for English language learners. Section 18 requires the superintendent to compile information concerning the number of students enrolling in advanced opportunities courses, to determine whether coursework was successfully completed, and to report the total expenditures for fiscal year 2026. The report shall also contain information about enrollment of the student population in post-secondary education and shall be posted to the website of the department by no later than January 5th, 2027. I'm not 100% sure who's going to be reaching out to you. I do know Jessica Barkley is working with Advanced Opportunities, and so it will be likely her reaching out to you to collect this information. Sections 19 and 20 are statutorily required transfers that have been made since I've been here. I've been here 28 years, and every year we transfer $80,000 to the Commission on Hispanic Affairs and $200,000 to the Idaho State Police. So this is very normal language to see in the appropriation bills. Section 21 again appropriates $1.6 million for digital content and curricula. The funds have been distributed for the last 2 years on a first come, first served basis. And if you were not requesting these funds within the first 3 to 4 minutes of that window opening, you did not receive funding. I really appreciate the language that was added for House Bill 599 that amends the distribution language in Idaho Code 334804 to a competitive needs-based method rather than that first come, first served basis. Please be watching for more information on the distribution of these funds and that competitive grant process that will come from Scott Lundstrom in the late spring. House Bill 599 has the new allocation language for this digital content and curriculum distribution, changing it to a competitive needs-based criteria rather than the existing first come, first served basis. So you might want to familiarize yourself with this language. Section 22 addresses the Idaho Digital Learning Academy, also known as IDLA. While this language was in the public school maintenance budget set in February, it was later amended by House Bill 940 and Senate Bills 1438 and 1452. House Bill 940 updated the IDLA related language in Idaho Code 335502 and 335504, including stating that fees for all courses required by the State Department of Education for graduation shall be no more than $40. Fees for all courses not required for graduation shall be at least $100. This will be covered in more detail during the post-legislative tour. And then Senate Bill 1438 reduced the $25,810,000 originally appropriated in the public school maintenance budget set by Senate Bill 1362 by $13,500,000, leaving IDLA with a $12.3 million appropriation for next year. Senate Bill 1452 amends the $40 per enrollment language in Section 22 of Senate Bill 1362, which is the public school maintenance budget. And so you can see that they struck Section 1 with the fee of $40 per enrollment. And again, everything IDLA will be covered more during the post-legislative tour. Sections 23 through 28 include language for the central services appropriation, and just a reminder that these are the dollars that are spent by the department on your behalf. So we've now covered the public school maintenance bill, 1362. We had several trailer bills that included adjustments to the funding for our schools. We had Senate Bill 1447, Senate Bill 1438, Senate Bill 1444, which is the Public School Enhancement Bill, and Senate Bill 1452. We also had several other bills that impacted the operation of public schools. And so we've included those here and on the next slide. And before we move on to our new trailer bills, we have a couple of questions. This is the newest. Okay. We're curious how districts are going to offset that cost for the $100 plus fees for non-required courses. This is where I will say that the department is working through all of this. The superintendent has a delegate assigned to the IDLA board. You know, they're very familiar and with what's going on with IDLA, and I'm sure this is going to be covered in more detail during the post-legislative tour. I just wanted you to be aware of it right now, but I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait. I think the first stop is on Monday. I have the schedule at the end and of when they'll be around the state presenting on this. The next question is, are you going to cover the reduction in transportation funding of $7.5 million? Yes, I am. That is, I believe, included in Senate Bill 1444, and we will get to that in just a few minutes. So, all right, we're going to jump back to Senate Bills 1288 and 1447, which is the Idaho High Needs Student Fund. Senate Bill 1288 creates Idaho Code 331016, the Idaho High Needs Student Fund, and Senate Bill 1447 provides a $5 million appropriation for fiscal year 2027 to fund this new special distribution that will be distributed to schools in 2026-2027. Funds will be distributed on an application basis, and the amount distributed will be subject to funding availability. Should funding requests exceed the amount available, each successful applicant will receive a proportionate amount on a pro rata basis. This is something else that we are wrapping our arms around. We're thrilled it passed. It will be covered in more detail during the post-legislative tour. One thing I do want to point out, and I may have a slide on this, is the applications for this fund, the special distribution, will be due next June 1st. You'll be able to submit applications throughout the year, and Lisa Pofowski-Rosa will be doing lots and lots of informational sessions, probably Jackie Hyatt, our Director of Special Education as well. But since the application is not due until June 1st, this will be a late in the year distribution. They'll need time to review it. And I'm imagining mid-June is when these dollars will go out to you next year, because we can't even do an initial distribution because of the language saying that if more than what's available is requested, all of the claims will be ratcheted down. And so just be aware that these funds will not come until next June if you are eligible to receive them. So moving on to the Public School Enhancement Bill, Senate Bill 1444. Section 6 reduces the general discretionary distribution factor from $23,472 to $19,723 for the 26-27 school year. And we discussed this earlier on slide 15, and so I won't go over that other than to remind you this reduction is for our virtual schools. Here's the language on the transportation funding that was just a question just a minute ago. Section 7 brings back the $7.5 million pro rata reduction for transportation funding and will be implemented with the distribution for transportation in the 26-27 school year. Transportation's initially distributed with that February foundation payment, and so that's when we will see that reduction. For this year only, it's the first year in a long time that we won't do that pro rata reduction, but next year we will. Section 8 is new language for next year. School finance has already begun meeting with the state board's IC team And updates will be shared at the monthly business manager webinars, during the IC Roadshow this summer, by email, etc. We will keep you in the loop on this for sure. The language in section 8 says that school districts and charter schools not authorized as a public virtual school, meaning 100% of your students are virtual, that provide instruction to students through an online platform for any class, excluding those offered through the Idaho Digital Learning Academy, shall report to the State Department of Education and the Office of the State Board of Education which classes are online based and the number of students enrolled in and attendance of students for each online class. School districts and public charter schools that offer classes through an online platform must register those programs as virtual buildings in the Idaho System for Education Excellence and record the students in those buildings accordingly. And so this is going to cause some changes at the state level. We're working through those. And we will continue to communicate with you on that. And you will, right now, a lot of our school districts and charter schools that aren't 100% virtual are just running those virtual students through their regular high school. And that will have to stop beginning based on this language for next school year. Instead, you'll be requesting of maybe their high school students a new high school building for those virtual students. And we have a question on this. It says, for Senate Bill 1444, will students who are enrolled at a traditional school but take one or more classes at a virtual school need to be reported differently? According to this language, yes. And I think the big question is how much programming can be done for this before the start of the school year, and how many adjustments can be made to your student management software. But yes, Scott, that's the intent of the language, is that those students will have to have maybe their average daily attendance broken out between the buildings. But I'm probably curling Dean's toes as I'm speaking. Dean, do you have anything you want to add?
No, other than what Julia has already mentioned, that how this is going to be specifically reported and is yet to be determined. The language is there. We just need to figure out how the nuts and bolts of it is going to work.
Right, and we've already had at least 2, maybe 3 meetings, and we're pulling in legislative services staff also so that we're all on the same page. But this is really a big undertaking for this next school year, and we recognize that and appreciate your patience as we work through all of this. I think Dean will be giving a regular update on this at our May 6th and our June 3rd webinars. All right.
I think there are a couple others that might.
Oh, okay. With the transportation cuts, what will the reimbursement rates be? While the transportation funding is part of the public school foundation payments, that's calculated by our transportation team. And so please reach out to Zane Cliver for more information on that. I think if your costs are similar to maybe what you had in fiscal year 2025, that your reimbursement might be similar, because in fiscal year 25, all the way back to maybe fiscal year 2014 or so, that $7.5 million reduction was happening. And so I guess don't look at this year's payment for transportation on the May 15th payment and think that's the amount that will continue into next school year. Because this is the only year that we will not make that $7.5 million reduction. Our virtual students have a different building number. Is that what will need to happen? Yes, that's our understanding. I'm picturing Ashley, who maintains our building list. She's the one you submit your building reconfiguration or your new building number request. We'll also be talking about this maybe at the May webinar and she'll maybe even be sending a targeted email to say, because of this language, if you have any virtual students at all, you need to be setting up separate buildings. But I want to get a little bit further in our meetings with the state board's IC team before we start doing a lot at the school with asking you to do a lot of the work. And then I assume we would not include classes involved in advanced opportunities. We don't know right now. That is something I'm just sure Dean is going to make a note of and that we will follow up in our business manager webinars. And I know the business manager webinars that I keep referring to are held typically the first Wednesday of each month at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. I'll acknowledge that we did not have one this month so that we could prepare for today's webinar. And we didn't have one in March because it overlapped with the in-person IASBO business manager workshops. But we will have a webinar in May and we will hopefully have a little bit more information that we can share with you. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program. I'm not seeing any other questions. All right. Oh, there is one more. Two more. Okay. All right. If a student takes an online class directly with the local community college, we will need to report a separate building number. Dean, I don't know the answer to this one.
Yeah, we are, those are the kinds of questions exactly we're trying to work out. If you strictly read the language, if we strictly read the language, then and that course is, and they're getting high school credit for that course, then the answer might be yes, but
we just don't know.
we don't
right
know
now.
yet.
And this next question's pretty close. It says, what if they are taking a course virtually directly through CWI, CEI, et cetera, instead of through IDLA?
It's the same.
Same answer. Perfect. All right, one more. Going back to IDLA, if the class is an elective that counts towards their graduation requirements, does it fall under the $40 fee, or is that for core classes only? They will have an answer for you during the post-legislative tour, and I'm sorry to defer this. I think everybody's trying to wrap their arms around all the changes that happened to the Idaho Digital Learning Academy this year. And I think they'll have really good information for you in another week, which is going to be really soon. All right, another comment. It's for anything, okay, this is from a school. It says it's for anything that counts towards graduation. That's how it reads and how IDLA has interpreted it. So again, thank you for that. Please do attend the post-legislative tour in your region and just get confirmation on all of these answers. We have a comment from IDLA that says right now we at IDLA will be charging $100 for any elective until we get further guidance. And that's fair. You know, we're just trying to figure this out. So we really do appreciate your patience on this. Gideon, do you have anything? Okay, just making sure. All right, I'm going to jump back into the slides now. Section 9 of Senate Bill 1444 provides for the $2,250,000 transfer from Central Services to the Division of Children's Programs for English Language Learners that we discussed earlier on slide, I think it was 25. Section 10 amends how the department can use certain funds appropriated for the Division of Central Services. These are dollars spent on your behalf. And section 11 is new language requiring the department to compile and report aggregate information regarding special education expenditures and Medicaid reimbursements for schools, and says the report shall include the total special education expenditures and revenues reported by schools, including state, local, and federal funds, and the total Medicaid reimbursements received by schools for special education services, and that legislative services staff will help determine the format of that report. The superintendent shall submit the report to the Joint Finance Appropriation Committee and the Legislative Services Office Budget and Policy Analysis Division by no later than December 15th, 2026. So be watching for more information on that. I'm assuming that will be done by Lisa Profelsky-Rosa, maybe Jackie Hyatt, to collect this information from you. Section 12 is standard appropriation language that does not impact schools. And section 13 increases the spending authority for federal funds by the $7.8 million we talked about earlier for fiscal year 2026, and section 14 retains that $7.8 million as part of our appropriation for fiscal year 2027. House Bill 599 was discussed earlier and changes the distribution method for the $1.6 million in digital content and curricula funds. House Bill 608 modifies the Public School Facilities Cooperative Funding Program in Idaho Code 33909. I don't know if there's maybe 10 schools or so 10 school districts that are receiving these funds, and I would encourage you to read through those changes if you are participating in this fund or this program. House Bill 624 adds new language for virtual education programs at school districts and charter schools. Idaho Code 3316-19 now includes language that states no school district, virtual education program, or educational services provider with which they contract shall furnish any payment of state funds directly to parents or legal guardians of enrolled students. Any state funds determined by the school district to be used as supplemental learning funds shall be used only for eligible education expenses as provided in section 33-5206 of Idaho Code. Similar language was included in Idaho Code 33-5206 sub 8 for charter schools. And this will also be covered in more detail during the post-legislative tour. House Bill 636 modifies the language in Idaho Code 33911, allowing eligible uses for remaining funds, meaning after you've made payments for your bond, your cooperative, supplemental, and plant levies, to also include making additional payments on existing school facilities bonds and making payments on lease purchase agreements for school facilities. And we'll certainly be communicating this language out with you when we distribute these funds in late August as a reminder. So I think we've all learned a little bit of a lesson with House Bill 728, and that is that as much as you help with the language, that sometimes further changes are made, and it's very important that when you read House Bill 728 that you go to the as amended or the engrossed, is it engrossed or engrossed? Engrossed version of that bill to get the latest. And so that's why I have as amended next to anywhere I have House Bill 728. This modifies and expands the definitions in Idaho Code 331001, including changing the definition of administrative staff to mean those who A, hold an administrator certificate and are employed as a superintendent, deputy superintendent, an elementary or secondary principal or vice principal, a director of special education, or a public charter school administrator as their primary employment. And we'll get to the definition of primary employment in a minute. Or B, are assigned administrative duties over and above those commonly assigned to teachers. And this is another great example of us. We're wrapping our arms around this language, and we are working our way through this language, and we'll have more information for you as time goes on. The definition in section 5 for career ladder was updated as a technical correction to include the advanced professional rung. And then section 7 is new language, defining classified staff to mean those who are employed in positions that are not administrative staff, instructional staff, or people service staff, and states that classified staff are not required to have certification as provided in Idaho Code 33-1201. Section 16 of 33-1001 updated the definition for instructional staff to mean those who hold an Idaho certificate issued under section 33-1201 Idaho Code and whose primary employment involves the direct instruction of a student or group of students. Section 17 is new language defining instructional support staff, a new category, to mean those who hold an Idaho certificate issued pursuant to Idaho Code 33-1201, whose primary employment involves supporting instructional staff, pupil service staff, or administrators with instruction-related services. This includes mentoring, curriculum coaching, or other instruction support positions. So this does add a new staffing category, and we are determining if this category can be funded for salary and benefit apportionment. So now we have the definition in section 22 for primary employment. This is new language, and it means the position of employment in which a person spends 50% or more of their time. We are working with legislative services on this language, and we recognize it could have a funding impact on you. We will share updates with schools at the post-legislative tour and at the monthly school finance and staffing certification webinars. Section 25 in Idaho Code 33-1001 was updated to define pupil service staff as those whose primary employment involves providing services to students but does not involve direct instruction of those students and who hold a pupil personnel service certificate. The definition for teacher was updated to mean any person employed in the teaching or instruction of students in any school district or charter school. And then because of adding several new definitions, the existing sections within 33-1001 of 7 through 34 were renumbered. And then this renumbering resulted in changes to several other Idaho Code sections. So just want you to be aware that some of the references had changed in those. And you can go directly to Senate or House Bill 728 as amended to see what those impacts were. Section 7 of House Bill 728 updates Idaho Code 33-1201 to include pupil service staff. Section 8 updated 33-1204 sub 4 to add language saying the State Board of Education may, subject to legislative approval, establish rules to provide for the issuance of a pupil service staff certificate to any certificated staff who has accumulated at least 25 years of combined certificated experience in an Idaho school or an equivalent public school system in another jurisdiction. Experience in any certificated position may be applied toward the total required years for the certificate. House Bill 831 added new language that will become effective January 1, 2028. I know that's a long time away, but I also know that many of you set 2 or 3 years worth of school calendars at one time. And so I thought it was important enough to mention that this new language says there shall be no in-person student instruction on the dates on which elections may be conducted under Section 34106 Idaho Code. However, in-person student instruction may occur upon a joint agreement between the county clerk and school district that student-occupied buildings will not be designated as polling places. For the purposes of this paragraph, instruction or activities includes, but is not limited to, professional development, personnel training, teacher in-service training, student extracurricular activities, and athletic activities. House Bill 846 modifies and adds new language to Idaho Code 33-1027, saying that schools should not count students as enrolled who have unexcused absences for the first 10 days of school. While this count will not impact the funding you receive, it will impact how you report your student information to the State Board of Education. House Bill 849 added Section 7 to Idaho Code 33-1004B that addresses the advancement of instructional CTE staff with industry experience on the career ladder. Previously, individuals with fewer than 4 years of certificated K-12 experience could not be evaluated for movement along the professional rung. This meant that anyone placed on the professional rung due to industry experience was not able to move forward on the Idaho career ladder and remained at the same cell and funding year level as their initial placement until at least the end of their 4th year of certificated experience. Instructional staff holding an occupational specialist certificate can now advance on the professional compensation rung if they meet compensation rung performance criteria expectations. If they do not meet those criteria, they will not advance. After 4 years, they will follow the standard advancement rules. So maybe some good news. And it looks like we have a question. Alex, it may be you. On our IC assignment reports, will we be able to report teachers who meet the definition of having duties assigned above those primarily assigned to teachers as administrative staff, even if they do not hold an administrative certificate? We're going to take a screenshot of that question, and that is something we will work on resolving by maybe maybe we can give you better information at the May webinar. I'm not sure how quickly we can get answers. Yes, we'll work with the Sinalaki's certification team and try to get you an answer on that. Thank you, Ashley, for making a shot of that screenshot. All right.
It looks like maybe one more.
One more. Okay. But they're not refreshing on my screen, so. If a student has one unexcused absence the first 10 days, how does this work? All right, so we're gonna go back and look at that slide. My understanding is this language says that they have to have been absent all 10 days for them to be excluded. I went too far. Thank you, Dean.
Keep going. Okay.
So this says that, I get it.
10 have to be unexcused.
All 10 of the first days of school have to be absent and unexcused for that student to be excluded from the information that you're reporting. And then another question is, I think the bigger question is, can Dean of Students still be funded under the career ladder? Or does this new law force the districts and charter schools to put them on the administrator scale? Do you want to?
I'm not sure if the dean of students would be considered instructional or administrative in the first place. I don't know for sure.
So we'll work with the certification team on just where that type of a position might fall. And please tune in for the May webinar. We'll also take a picture of that question. Okay, anything else? Okay. All right, and I think we finished this slide. So we're going to move on. House Bill, staying though with House Bill 849, also added sections 9 and 10 to 33-1004B to address pupil service staff with industry experience. So this is new language in Idaho code that allows pupil service staff placement based on industry experience. While we could already place CTE instructional staff based on their industry experience, this new language now allows pupil service staff the same treatment. So good news. Previously, pupil service staff could not be placed higher than R1 if they had entered their first year holding an Idaho certificate. Beginning July 1, current pupil service staff on the residency compensation run can be advanced if their industry experience qualifies them for a higher placement than where they are now. Please work with Alexandra McCann in school finance to adjust pupil service staff placement for those impacted by this language. Again, it's not something that has to be done immediately. I imagine this is something she'll mention again in the May and the June school business manager webinars. Like instructional staff, pupil service staff can now move one cell each year during the first 3 years if they meet performance expectations. If they do not meet those performance expectations, they cannot move. House Bill 849 also added section 11 to Idaho Code 33-1004B, which allows for the counting of both the years in public K-12 schools and the years in accredited private schools and industry for meeting the time requirement in regards to which placement rules are applied. New language was also added to 33-1201 capital A that will allow individuals with industry experience to count those industry years towards meeting the time requirement for the professional and the advanced professional endorsements. House Bill 940 amended the language in Idaho Code 33-5502 and 33-5504 as it relates to the Idaho Digital Learning Academy and was discussed earlier in this presentation. Senate Bill 1339 replaces the language in Idaho Code 33-320, formerly known as Continuous Improvement Plans and Training, with new language titled Idaho Code 33-320, Strategic Performance Plans and Training. The language still allows up to $6,600 to be distributed to each school district and public charter school, and new language allows the funds to be utilized for administrator mentorships that will be capped at 25% of such distribution. Andrew Konopacki on the school finance team will share an updated reimbursement request with schools in July because this will become effective for the fiscal year 2027 school year. Senate Bill 1438 is where we find the decrease in appropriation for the Idaho Digital Learning Academy, and again was discussed earlier in this presentation. Senate Bill 1452 changes the language in the fiscal year 2027 maintenance appropriation in Senate Bill 1362, striking that $40 per enrollment language. This concludes not my entire presentation, but concludes my presentation covering the session bills that could impact your funds for the next school year or are related to other activities involving the public school finance team at the department. So we're moving on now to part 2. The fiscal year 2027 appropriation summary we talked about at the start of today's webinar included distributions for salary and benefit apportionment, transportation, border contracts, exceptional contracts, tuition equivalents, discretionary funds that all flow to you via the foundation payments that are made August 15th, November 15th, February 15th, May 15th, and July 15th. Other payments, though, come to you as special distributions throughout the year. It is these distributions we'll be talking about in part 2 and accounts for about $202.4 million, or about 6.5% of the overall public school appropriation. First, though, let me show you how to find the 2026-2027 budget forms on the public school finance portion of the department's website. If you go to the website at www.sde.idaho.gov and you go to the bar across the top, select Finance and Transparency, and then select Public School Finance from the drop-down box. Once you're on the public school finance portion of the website, scroll down until you see Forms. Then select all forms and scroll down to budget forms and select 2026-2027. We purposely leave the 2025-2026 budget forms on our website because we know so many of you will officially amend this year's budget as you are setting the fiscal year 2027 budget. So they're still available on our website for you. The forms are mostly the same, and please be very careful if you're a school district that you only use the school district template for salary-based apportionment and for support unit calculations. If you're a charter school, make sure you use the charter school templates. There's just some very small differences between the funding for these two types of schools, but we want you to be able to have the most accurate budget possible. I want to take a couple of minutes to talk to you about estimating your support units. Because now if you're going to have 2 separate distribution factors for general discretionary, depending on if they're on-site students versus virtual students. What we would encourage you to consider doing is to look at what would your overall support units be for all students. Combine your virtual and your on-site students, calculate your support units, and then set that total aside. And then look at your student demographics. Do you have more virtual students or more on-site students? Whichever group is the largest, rerun the support unit calculation for those students. And then it would be fair to take the difference then and apply it to that other group of students. What we want to caution you about doing is running your smallest group of students, because the support unit forms there's minimums that could kick in if you have, depending on where you fall on that support unit divisor table. And so please be very careful if when you calculate your overall amount of support units, if there are no minimums that pop up, the word minimum will literally pop up. If that word minimum pops up when you're running your smaller group of students, that minimum will not apply. Because what we'll do is, just like if you're a West Ada, we're going to take all of your 712 students and combine them together to generate your support units. and see if the minimums apply. But my guess is, and I may be speaking out of turn here, is that we could eventually be modifying the support unit calculation table to show support units for your on-site students, support units for your virtual students, and then the minimums would only apply if those two amounts combined would equal the minimums. And Dean, what would you like to add to that? I'm just so worried on schools. I just really want to caution you on calculating your support units. And you'll see when you look at the estimating M&O worksheet, is we're going to have you enter in your total support units. We're going to have you enter in your on-site support units and your virtual support units. Dean?
I think what you said, your initial instructions were good. To reiterate that, look at your combined overall, all students use the templates to calculate support units, and then whichever group, virtual or in person, is the larger, rerun it for only the estimated enrollment for that group. And then, and then what did you say, Julie? The difference, when you run it for the bigger group, the difference, you can use that.
You can take the difference between your overall student calculation and then what was calculated for the larger group, and maybe roughly estimate that that's your total for the smaller group.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to figure this all out together, but we're gonna do our best to give you the best guidance that we have. And so I hope that helps some. Dean will be covering this. He will be fair game during our May and our June webinars for any questions that you might have on this. Another question that we have is, did I cover House Bill 711? And thank you, Gideon, for telling me what that House bill was. That is the alternative authorization bill, and that impacts our certification team. So Sinalaki, and this will be covered during the post-legislative workshop. So you didn't miss it. Thank you for keeping us honest, but we do have a plan to cover it at the post-legislative workshop. And then the question is, and this one is on me, where do you normally post the appropriation spreadsheet? I cannot locate last year's on your budget page, and that's fair. I also didn't see it when I was looking to pattern our posting for this year. I will get it posted for fiscal year 2027. It does include the appropriation information for fiscal year 2026. I can also, I just hesitate to post it for fiscal year 26. Maybe what I could do is post just the two columns showing the original fiscal year 26 appropriation and then the revised 26 appropriation with those forms. If you email me and request, actually email Ashley Petrus, she will respond, I'm sure, much faster than I will, for a copy of any of the appropriation summaries, and she'll get that sent to you while we wait for it to be posted onto the website. But we have requested it be posted. I just think it's, our webmaster is pretty busy right now with everything going on with this webinar and then the post-legislative tour. So I have some homeschool students who may take a few public school classes. Are these homeschool students who take a few public school classes able to use the private school tax credit program? I would defer that question to the State Tax Commission. I do believe they have a pretty darn good frequently asked questions page, but that private school tax credit is overseen by the State Tax Commission, and I will not even venture a guess.
I'll venture a little bit, but I think the answer was no, but there was legislation that passed this session, House Bill 934, And so I'll just read what that language says. The new language says a student participating in activities or instruction for which no academic credit is awarded, participating in public school sports or other extracurricular activities, transferring to and from non-public schools during the tax year, homeschooling, or purchasing and taking Idaho Digital Learning Academy courses that are offered for a fee and are not included in the IDLA enrollment funding by the state pursuant to section 321020 Idaho Code shall not be considered so enrolled pursuant to the provisions of this paragraph. So I think we'll get some more information and we can share out on the post legislative tour. We'll do some more analysis of this, but I think what that's saying is the answer was no. Now homeschooling, if they don't, if none of these provisions apply, they could be enrolled and get the tax credit. So we'll get some more information on that.
Okay, I think reshare. It disappeared from my computer, so just a minute. Ashley, could you maybe read the next question that we have? I'm sorry, I know your voice, but.
If most high school students are taking one advanced ops qualifying IDLA course outside of school hours, do we have to do the crazy math to calculate what portion of an FTE to apply to virtual support calculations?
Anyone want to venture a guess on that? I think that is one of those questions that will be determined as we learn more about this language. And we will again take a screenshot of that. And I am still trying to get my screen back. I'll read the next question. And it's also, what is the calculation for virtual students? So the calculation, there's new language in Idaho Code that says virtual students must be reported in their own building. And that will be necessary so that we can calculate the support units and apply that lower distribution factor, which I believe is $19,723. And the distribution factor for the on-site students will be $23,472. And so that's why we're going to have a distinction between virtual students and on-site students. And it's going to be very possible that, thank you, Ashley, that you have a student taking 2 online classes and then the rest of their day is on site. And so that's what we're working on, is how that student will be reported. So, okay, that's good. Anything else? I think that's it. Okay. All right. So back to the webinar. So we've covered that how important it is that you calculate your support units using the best information you can estimate, breaking out virtual and on-site students. As for the budget forms, this is where you will also find all the budget forms, the revenue pages, the expenditures pages, the estimating the state maintenance and operation revenue, the cover page, the certification page, etc. Under supporting documents, you'll find just that, the supporting documents. You'll find a worksheet to help you estimate your other funding, which is paid to you on line 6 of your foundation program calculation worksheets. And that includes district agency contracts, several different types of tuition equivalencies, of which court-ordered tuition equivalency would be the most common, as well as the state-funded serious emotional disturbance allowance. To support your calculations on that other funding, Andrew has provided a district-to-agency rate as well as tuition rates for estimating those dollars. You'll also find soon, I'm sure it'll just be posted anytime now, the special distributions for fiscal year 2027 that we'll be covering next. The only difference between special distributions and special distributions with coding suggestions is that that second document includes, code your, school district facility funds to this fund and use this revenue code. So that's just some helpful information we hope for you. The last form I really want to call out is that summary of revisions. Any revisions made to any of our budget forms after their initial posting will be summarized on this document, and it will include the budget form impacted, the date of the revision, and a summary of the revision. As you're working through these forms, we've worked fast and furious to get everything done and posted. If something doesn't look quite right, please reach out to us so that we can research it further. And maybe we need to make a correction. And so that we can do that, we have to know about it. As you're preparing to finalize your budget, please take one last look at this summary of revisions to make sure that changes weren't made that might impact your budget. So we have a couple more questions. Start here. Similar question, is an on-site student physically present in the building taking advanced opportunities dual credit classes online through a college considered an on-site student or a virtual student?
To be honest, with the new legislation, we haven't worked through all of these details. We simply don't have answers to, frankly, most of these questions, these very, very good, timely questions that you're bringing up. We don't have answers to them, but we will be working to get those answers as quickly as possible.
Right, and what I think as these questions are just awesome that are coming in, please either keep putting them in the chat or please email me or Dean these questions. What I would like to do, and I know this can get bogged down in the details, is to compile a list of all of these questions, run it past the executive team, get some answers, and post this document similar to what the State Tax Commission has done for the private school tuition credit. And these answers could change as time goes on, but at least maybe we can get some initial guidance started with that. And we'll start working on that now, but I guess my fear is that no one's going to really know the answers. But that's when we will pull in legislative services, Division of Financial Management, and our attorney to just try to come up with the best guidance that we can give you. All right, next question is, if they are enrolled in a brick and mortar full-time for 4 hours a day, which is the threshold to count under guidance and direction of a teacher for 4 hours, is the guidance for reporting that student as a 1 attendance, then it shouldn't matter if they are taking virtual classes in the district beyond that. Since I'm going to guess it is going to matter, because you can't just go 4 hours a day and receive the credits you need. A typical high school day is 6 to 7 hours, depending if you're a 5-day or a 4-day. But this is another question we'll definitely put in our guidance. That's my guess right now, is that the ADA will be just thinking out loud. This is not a fact, but why wouldn't we take maybe the minutes for on-site classes versus the minutes for online classes and allocate out the ADA that way? Again, that is not what we're going to do at this time, but that was just Julie thinking out loud. So back to IDLA, even if one IDLA, just a second. Even if IDLA for graduation class, would that qualify to be a virtual school? Just to clarify, pretty sure the language on that slide excluded classes through the Idaho Digital Learning Academy. Dean is nodding, so I will say that that language specifically excluded IDLA. All right, I think that wraps it up for questions for now. We'll keep checking back. So the special distributions that we send to you, nearly all of them are based on dollars, are based on data that you upload via IC, including data for midterm and best 28-week average daily attendance, the enrollment information, and instructional and pupil service FTE. It's critical that you report accurate data via IC in compliance with state laws and board rules. If you aren't sure about something, please reach out to your regional IC technical coordinator, Amy Ziegler, Roger Evans, Vance Allen, or to the public school finance team so that we can help you. We work very, very closely with the IC team. In fact, we have weekly meetings with them. And so a lot of times one of our groups will get a question and we discuss it at these meetings to come up with the best guidance we can give to you. So please remember to review your data that you submit through IC after it's been uploaded, just to make sure that everything you thought you were uploading did go through the upload process. So the special distribution document included with the budget forms, which will be posted soon, includes information on how to budget for these dollars and tells you who to contact with questions. The special distributions are in alphabetical order and begin with the $27 million appropriated for advanced opportunities. This is made up of two different funding streams. The first, the Fast Forward program, provides funding to pay for overload courses, dual credit courses, post-secondary credit-bearing exams, career technical certification exams, CTE workforce training, college entrance exams, preliminary college entrance exams, and proctoring fees. Every public school student in grades 7 through 12 is allocated $4,625 for these purposes. In most cases, these funds will be paid directly to Idaho Public post-secondary institutions and IDLA. The second funding stream is the funding for early graduation. A student who graduates at least 1 year early is eligible for a scholarship equal to 35% of the statewide average daily attendance, ADA, funding, which they can use at an Idaho Public post-secondary school. The department will disperse these scholarships directly to the college or universities. Schools will receive an equivalent award of 35% of the statewide average daily attendance funding for any student who graduates at least 1 year early that is reported to the department by June 15th of each year. If you're going to have some qualifying students for this, I want you to know that the amount for fiscal year 2026 was $2,582. Please contact Jessica Barkley with any questions or for additional information on advanced opportunities. Almost $12.6 million was appropriated for charter school facilities. Charter schools should budget $400 per next year's 2026, 2027 best 28-week adjusted average daily attendance for charter school students where a majority of their instruction was received at a physical facility that was owned or leased by the charter school. Online only and online on-site charter schools should request a worksheet from Andrew Konopacki to estimate their payment. Please contact Andrew with any questions you might have on this distribution. $9 million was again appropriated for college and career advisors and student mentors. These dollars will be distributed based on your 2026-2027 enrollment. And anytime you see enrollment and school finance, you should know that that is that first Friday in November. If you will have 100 or more students enrolled in grades 8 through 12, you should budget the greater of $62.50 per 8 through 12 student, or $18,000. If you will have less than 100 students enrolled in grades 8 through 12, you should budget the greater of $180 per student, or $9,000. Please contact Jackie Deal in School Choice and Student Engagement for additional information. And this is the first time we're seeing the asterisk, and this is a very important note. The amounts in this distribution for the $18,000 and the $9,000 and the $180 are all statutory. The amount of the $62.50 per student for those schools with 100 or more grades 8 through 12 students, that's an estimate. And we are not going to know the actual amount until the time of the distribution. So every time you see that asterisk, please realize that it's an estimate based on our best guess of what enrollment will be next year for our existing schools, what the enrollment will be for the 7 new charter schools. It's an educated guess, but it's still a guess. For the last 2 years, digital content and curriculum funds have been distributed on a first come, first served basis, with the entire $1.6 million being claimed in the first several minutes of that window opening. Beginning July 1st, 2026, these funds will be distributed on a competitive grant basis and not on a first come, first served basis per the language in House Bill 599. Distributions from the fund shall be made to schools that meet the requirements based on competitive needs-based criteria established by the department. If distributions cannot be made due to lack of available monies, requests by eligible schools shall be prioritized according to the competitive needs-based criteria established by the department once monies become available. More information on this new application process will be shared probably in the late spring by our department's Director of Content and Curriculum, Scott Thunstrom, and he's also the contact if you have any questions. Well, we'll go back to the English language learners. Remember, there was amending language. While $4,820,000 was appropriated initially for English language learner in the public school maintenance bill, Section 9 of the public school enhancement bill allowed for a one-time $2,250,000 transfer from the Division of Central Services to the Division of Children's Programs for this distribution, which is why we're now telling schools to budget $340 per eligible English learner that was tested on the spring 2026 access assessment and was identified as L1 or LE as reported in the Idaho English Learner Management System, ELMS. Please contact Maria Puga in Federal Programs with any questions. The High Needs Student Fund distribution is new for fiscal year 2027 and will be awarded to school districts and charter schools for individual students whose eligible costs exceed $30,000 in the school year. The department is currently developing an application that will be available in the fall. This application will require documentation demonstrating full transparency of eligible costs incurred that have not been reimbursed with other funding sources, including school-based Medicaid, and will be subject to review and approval prior to payment. Please note that applications will be due no later than June 1st, 2027. So again, just a reminder that the funds will be distributed next June and will not come to you earlier in the school year. Please contact Lisa Popelski Rosa in special education for any additional information or with questions. $72,812,000 was appropriated for literacy intervention. 2 separate calculations should be done to allocate or estimate these dollars for your budget. One will be based on your K-3 enrollment, and one will be based on your student level testing. Schools should budget $410 per 2026, 2027 enrolled student in kindergarten through grade 3 as of that first Friday in November. And you should budget $403 per student who improved a full tier or who remained proficient on the statewide reading assessment fall 2025 to spring 2026. Please note that only fall 2025 to spring 2026 statewide reading assessments will be used because of the change in testing vendor. Again, this year, economically disadvantaged students who improve a full tier or who remain proficient will receive an additional 0.75 weighting for this allocation based on testing. Please contact IACA for additional information on testing data and Scott Thunstrom for additional information on uses of funds and reporting. $7,358,700 was appropriated for the math and science requirement. You should budget based on your next year's estimated enrollment for each of your regular high schools, the dollar amounts shown here. We have worked with the legislature in the past to try to get this language modified, but we have been unsuccessful in those attempts. And so we will continue to use the language that is in Idaho Code 331021 to allocate these funds. Because of the variability in funding, should you grow by one student, this is another one of those distributions that we will only make once instead of doing an initial distribution of 80% and then doing a final distribution of the remaining funds once we get your March IC data. And so once we have a little bit of breathing room, we will be working on this payment as well as a whole lot of other final special distributions to send to you. And when we say regular high schools, the language specifically states that alternative secondary schools are not eligible for this funding. And I am the contact if you have any questions on this distribution. $40,000 was appropriated for National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. You should budget $2,422.60 per eligible instructional staff. This is a rare distribution. We had 5 school districts receive funding for 5 teachers total statewide for fiscal year 2026. And 6 teachers received this funding in fiscal year 2025. So unless you are aware of a specific teacher, most schools will budget 0 for this line item. Overall, $23,250,000 was appropriated for professional development, with $10,850,000 to be distributed for general professional development, $2.9 million to be distributed for dyslexia professional development, and the balance, $9.5 million, will be spent on your behalf in the Division of Central Services. For the $10,850,000 in general professional development, you should budget a base of $8,000 per school district or charter school, plus $459 per 2026-27 instructional and pupil service FTE, all funding sources. Please contact Scott in Content and Curriculum. For professional development dyslexia and the $2.9 million appropriated, schools should budget a base of $1,500 per district or charter school, plus $128 per 2026-27 instructional and pupil service FTE, all fund sources. Scott is also the contact for that distribution. For the $4,715,000 appropriated for remediation coursework, you should budget $21 per student for each ISAT, English Language Arts, Math, Science, in which the student does not meet proficiency. Please contact IACA for additional information on testing data and Scott for with questions on the uses of these funds and reporting. For the $4,324,900 appropriated for safe and drug-free schools, schools should budget a base of $2,000 plus $13.25 per prior year, meaning 2025-26 full-term average daily attendance. Katie Watkins is the contact for this now, beginning in July, if you have any questions. And again, back to our brand new charter schools, please be sure that you only budget that base amount of $2,000 because that being your first year of operation, you will not have prior year average daily attendance. We have a couple of questions that we can jump over to. Why hasn't the math and science requirement ever been fixed? And that's something we also want to know the answer to. We have requested that this language, even under the prior administration, there was work done to change this distribution. The current administration has also made attempts to have this language changed. And it hasn't happened. But we will, of course, continue our efforts.
I think one of the most recent effort last session, so there was a House bill on this one, and it had a fiscal impact in order to kind of even out those big jumps between levels. There was a fiscal impact associated with it. So I think that was one of the main reasons that it didn't move forward.
Man, we have a great question that I hadn't thought of. Maybe Alex has already had thoughts on this, but what about the instructional support staff, that new funding category that we have? Will they be eligible for the professional development funds? That's something that we are going to have to go back and read what the exact wording is in the intent language and research a little bit more. And so thank you, Ashley. We'll have more information as we learn more. Are virtual high schools eligible for math and science funding?
Nothing excludes them.
So because the language specifically only excludes alternative high schools, it's our understanding that these schools have received and will continue to receive. I'd have to pull up the actual distribution, but I do believe we have paid them. Dean's nodding yes. We have paid them these funds in the past. Any other questions? Okay. All right, moving on to the school district facilities fund. This will be the fourth year distributions for school district facility funds will be made. Like the prior years, we will not know the exact amount to be distributed until all the transfers are made by the other state agencies. This is my comment only, not to reflect on Gideon or the superintendent, but I share your frustration that these transfers happen on the very last business day in August. And this will always be a priority payment for us. And we will do our very best to get these funds out, the information out to you as soon as possible. So the basis for the distribution will be your 25-26 best 28-week average daily attendance for students at physical facilities that are part of the school grounds. A reminder, this is for school districts only. And beginning this school year, these funds are now continuously appropriated, and therefore no specific appropriation was made for the distribution in fiscal year 2026 or fiscal year 2027. Instead, statutorily required transfers are to be made and distributed by no later than August 31st as required by multiple sections in Idaho Code. So it's difficult to tell you how to estimate for these dollars. My best attempt is as follows. Using fiscal year 2026 midterm average daily attendance as a placeholder for best 28 weeks average daily attendance that will be known in late June, and using the fiscal year 2025 adjustment for off-site students as a placeholder for the fiscal year 2026 adjustments that will be known in late July, and estimating the total amount available for fiscal year 2027's estimated distributions could be as follows. If $50 million was available, then the distribution would be approximately $190 per eligible best 28-week ADA. $250 million is available. Then $965 per eligible best 28-week ADA would be distributed. I did reach out to the Lottery Commission to ask if they had a better estimate of what the lottery dividend would be, which is one of the factors in this. And I haven't heard back yet, but right now we know we'll probably have $45 to $50 million for the lottery distribution. And then there's several statutorily required transfers that we'll have from the property tax relief fund, from the sales taxes collected by the state. And I know that Idaho, that funding was tight this year. But I haven't seen shorter lines at Costco or Fred Meyer or Winco, so I'm hopeful that sales tax revenues are continuing to remain strong, and that the distribution will be between the 150, maybe 200, maybe a little bit more $1 million range. I promise you that we will prioritize this calculation and the distribution, and we'll share the information with you just as soon as we know what it is. And for the last 2 years, the distributions have literally been made the morning or the afternoon of the final day, business day in August. So that's what, I don't have anything more for you, but we can certainly talk through it if you have any questions. I'm the contact for that. And earlier we mentioned that continuous improvement plans, that title changed to strategic performance plans and training. We're again telling schools to budget up to $6,600 and reminding you that those funds are distributed on a reimbursement basis. And we also want you to be aware that funds requested for administrator mentorships may not exceed $1,650. Andrew will cover this in more detail probably at the June Business Manager webinar, and we'll have be sharing an updated worksheet with you later this summer. And then technology. The $36.5 million for technology for the classroom technology infrastructure, wireless technology, learning management systems, will be distributed, once we have received that verification from you that you have a learning management system. To estimate your distribution, you should budget the sum of the base amount below on the slide using your estimated 2026-27 midterm average daily attendance plus $97 per 26-27 midterm average daily attendance. And please contact me with any questions on this distribution. So this concludes part 2 of my presentation. I just have a couple of more talking points I'd like to share with you. Since we didn't have a school finance webinar this month, a couple of things that we would have shared with you is that while this Percy sick leave premium holiday was set to expire on June 30th, 2026, the Percy board voted to extend that premium holiday through June 30th, 2028. So you do not need to include that cost in your budget for this year. I wanted to let school districts know that federal forest funds, also known as secure rural school funds, we received an additional allocation for federal fiscal year 2024, and those funds were distributed to the counties for qualifying school districts in March. We've been told that a federal fiscal year 2025 amount is still coming. We typically receive those funds maybe in April or so. So I'll remain hopeful that they come this month, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they don't come until May or June. And again, we'll do the allocation, share it with the counties so that they can allocate these dollars to you. I wanted to talk about the language around school age compliance. This language was not included in this year's fiscal year 2027 public school appropriation bills. However, it is something that we are going to continue to check. School age is defined by Idaho Code 33201, and the language for this year included us withholding your November 15th payment if you were not in compliance. When we looked at the school age of your student, you guys were awesome. We had questions on only a handful of students, very, very small percentage of students around the state, and you addressed our questions. And we just really appreciate the work that you did on that. We'll work on that again this year, but we will not be holding your November 15th payment if you're not in compliance. Instead, we'll continue to work with you to get any issues resolved. And then my final reminder, well, almost final reminder, is to please continue to review the data acquisition calendar for upcoming due dates. You'll find a link for that on the Public School Finance website, as well as on the department's website. And a reminder that our next school business manager, the school finance business manager webinar is scheduled for May 6th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. And then the State Tax Commission does budget and levy training workshops throughout the state. This year, they are changing to a webinar format, and they're offering 2 different webinars, one specific to cities and counties. I would not encourage school districts to sit through that one. Instead, I would save all of your energy for sitting through the one specifically for school districts. And so please reach out to Jeff Middleton at the State Tax Commission if you have any questions. And I do really encourage school district business managers to attend this webinar. I think the L2s, et cetera, are already confusing enough, and any help that you can get will just make that process that much easier. And then finally, we have on the screen before us the post-legislative tour dates. I think we can all go back to when we were in college and remember how awful parking was on college campuses. And so we've been asked to encourage you to carpool as much as necessary. And if you've learned everything you need to know at this webinar and you are registered for this post-legislative tour for your region, please reach out to Taylor Baggerly and cancel your registration so that somebody else can have your spot. But I do think a lot of good information will be shared at the post-leg because we've had another week to work through a few of the questions that we all have. This is a listing of the public school finance team. Please reach out to any of us if you have questions. As you are working through the budget forms, if you have questions on the general forms, you can reach out to Cindy or Ashley. If you have attendance or staffing questions, please reach out to Dean or Tressa and Alex so that they can help you. We really do want you to budget as accurately as possible. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I want to say thank you for making it through to the end with me. And just know how much we value what you do for our schools and our students in Idaho. And with that, Gideon, do you have any? We have a couple of questions. Thank you, Ashley. Oh dear, one of the questions I didn't see soon enough. And okay, you mentioned that the school facilities might be $150 to $2 million for 26. What was the amount in 25? Okay, that I can tell you. I can tell you that school district facilities in fiscal year 2025, well, I'll start with fiscal year 2024. $135 million was appropriated and the actual distribution was about $106 million. In fiscal year 2025, $203 million was appropriated and $141 almost million was distributed. In fiscal year 2026, the first year that no set appropriation was made, $235 million was distributed. And I have to caution you on using that as a basis because I'm trying to remember if there were some one-time transfers, at least in fiscal year 25. I think there were some one-time transfers. I'm not sure about 26. I can tell you that we did start fiscal year 2026 with a beginning balance of about just over $6 million because a transfer that hadn't been made by the time we made the distribution remained in that fund until the following year. So for school district facilities, I know it depends on who you ask. If I had faith, I would say budget between the $150 million and the $200 million distribution. But I'm an accountant. I'm ultra conservative. And so I have a hard time saying that out loud. Yeah, I just don't have anything for you on that one. Just to pick what you think is best. There's all kinds of transfers that have to be made. With sales tax revenues, and if they're lower, what I'm not sure about is if it's like the order of operations. If they start with the public school transfer and do that first, and then they do the public defender's transfer, and then they do the next transfer. I've actually reached out to Legislative Services Office to ask for some guidance on that, and I think there's a meeting to be held soon to determine if it's going to be a pro rata distribution, if there's not enough funds, or if it's the order of operations and public schools gets their amount first. The question we have, next question is, are virtual schools still ineligible for this lottery distribution? All right, so there is no lottery distribution anymore. Those funds have instead been rolled into the school district facilities distribution that is only for school districts. It's combined with the sales tax revenue transfers and the property tax relief transfers and goes out to our school districts. Those schools must then use them to reduce the amount they're levying for their bonds, their supplemental levies, their plant facility levies. And that takes up about 90 to 95% of the funds that they receive. Oh, darn. I see that the sales tax, I'm assuming you're referring to the State Tax Commission workshop is the same day as the CGSGA. I'm assuming that's a federal term, workshop in our region. And so I'm sorry, that overlap is happening. It's so hard to schedule good dates for these webinars. I'm not sure if the State Tax Commission is going to record their webinar. I think that's a really good question to reach out to Jeff Middleton and ask him at the State Tax Commission. Oh, and it was CFSGA. Okay, that is a consolidated plan in federal programs. So I'm sorry about that overlap. Maybe somebody else in your office can go. And maybe they will record their webinar. I've been in communication with Ben and Alan at the State Tax Commission, and I've told them, the general format that we use for our school business manager webinars, and maybe they will do something similar. So I think I don't see any other questions. Again, thank you all so much for attending this. We'll get a recording posted as soon as we can get it transcribed. And with that, I just wish you a lovely day. Thank you.